Hello folks, welcome to Virtual Realms. I'm Ranger 1. Today we're going to take a look at an interesting aerial mount that was recently introduced into ARK Survival Evolved, the Pelagornis. Now, the Pelagornis is a much larger ancestor of waterbirds like the stork or the pelican. Its full name, in-game and in reality, was Pelagornis myocanus, which basically means that it's the Pelagornis, which is from the Miocene period. Now, the Miocene was an era where you saw a lot of animals that are very similar to animals we know today, although there are notable exceptions to that in certain parts of the world, and many of these creatures were overly large compared to what we're used to. This particular specimen that I have with me today I have named Goose, because after all, the Pelagornis is a navy bird, and I felt it was fitting. Now, I called it a navy bird because it is one of the most versatile mounts in the game. It can fly, swim, or walk, depending on what you need. This means that if you're on an extended trip, no matter where you are, if you need to land to regain stamina, well, it doesn't matter where you are, you can put down safely. Well, local carnivores aside. Goose and I have decided to make an early morning trip, right after dawn, to the northwest. We're going to check out one of this bird's strongest points in the northern Arctic regions. We're going to make this a little bit of a leisurely trip because I want just a little bit of time to discuss the traits of this amazing creature in-game first, and then toward the end of the video we'll discuss its qualities as they were in reality. Probably the first thing we should cover right off the bat, this creature is more for utility than it is for PvP capability. While its bite can be made to be fairly damaging, it is not able to grasp opponents, whether those be small dinosaurs, like a pteranodon can or an Argentavis, or a person, and that limits what you can do with it in combat. Its bite is fairly nasty. You'll notice the sharp tooth-like protrusions from the beak. Those really aren't teeth. The beak was actually shaped that way. Long before Pelagornis came around, the early ancestors of birds did indeed have true teeth, but as they evolved away from that, finally that no longer became an option in their evolutionary makeup. However, these bony, toothy plates coming down, it's actually the beak material itself, those take the place of actual teeth when it comes to gripping slippery prey like fish or eels. That is reflected in-game by the fact that this is an extremely efficient harvester of fish meat. It does approximately 10 times the normal amount of damage that it would do against any other type of opponent, but when it attacks coelacanths or saber-toothed salmon or piranha, it hits with amazing force, finishing off most coelacanth and salmon in one hit, and piranha rarely take more than 2 or 3. And it can harvest with that same bite. So if you get a one-hit kill, it's one and done because you've already got the meat. While that fact may be of marginal importance right now, because the Pelagornis is, well, if not the only one of the very, 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 very few creatures that only eat fish meat in-game at the moment, very soon, new creatures will be introduced that only eat fish meat as well, and many of the creatures that we're used to in-game currently will be switched over to that to more accurately reflect what their true diets actually were. Now, you may be saying to yourself, that's great, and in the future maybe I'll get one, but I really don't need one right now, it has no value. Well, that's not entirely true. The Pelagornis has a hidden talent, something that it excels at currently that you might find very handy. We'll cover that in just a minute, but first, a few more basic facts. The Pelagornis doesn't live on land. You almost exclusively find them far out to sea at the very edge of the map, either floating on the surface of the water, swimming about, or flying above the water as if they're looking for fish. They do occasionally come in closer to land once they've initially been spotted, And that's very helpful because taming a Pelagornis can be very tricky. They don't take a lot of tranquilizer to bring down. And using tranquilizer darts or a bow and arrow to deliver that tranquilizer is the best method. Crossbows have a tendency to do too much damage and kill the Pelagornis before it goes unconscious. But that's not the tricky part. If you take the Pelagornis down while it's in flight, when it falls into the water, it sinks like a stone. Obviously, that's not ideal. However, and this is only hearsay, I haven't tested this personally, I understand that if you take the Pelagornis while it's swimming on the surface of the water and knock it unconscious there before it has a chance to take flight, well, then it continues to float on the water, and you can tame it normally. If that's true, that'll help a lot. Most of the people that I know of that have tamed a Pelagornis have either been fortunate enough to catch it flying over a spit of land, or they have simply herded it in that direction. It will flee from you when attacked, just like a Quetzal does. Herding a Pelagornis toward land can be a bit frustrating, but not as frustrating as the alternative method that I have heard people use, which is to pilot a raft underneath the Pelagornis and use a bola on it and bring the bird down on your raft. I can't imagine how difficult that would be. I'm sure it's possible, but it's not something I'd personally care to do. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Pelagornis does have kind of a hidden talent that not necessarily everyone knows about. And that's the reason why we've come so far north on this journey. You see, as it turns out, the Pelagornis is a very efficient gatherer of organic polymer. To properly demonstrate this will require a dangerous, high-speed and bloody Karuku hunt to bring down these elusive creatures. The faint of heart are advised to keep their eye on the polymer count at the top of the screen during the carnage. I'm sorry for the excessive violence in that last section, but it was necessary for science. I'll just have to make sure that Tuxford never sees this particular video, otherwise I'll never hear the end of it. You know, it occurs to me on my flight back that there might be another niche use for the Pelagornis outside of its rather impressive ability to gather organic polymer, as its body is considerably smaller than the other flyers on the island. You might be able to get it into caves that you would have difficulty getting, say, a pteranodon into. Although it lacks the killing power you might find necessary for many situations, if you just need an aerial mount inside a cave to, say, slip directly through to grab that drop that's located at the rear of the cave, well, this might be just the ticket. Oh, and just for the record, Goose and I found out the hard way that if you ever find yourself pursued by angry Argies, pulling up and hitting the brakes will not cause them to just fly on by. Fortunately, a Pelagornis is fast enough to outrun all but the swiftest pursuers, and has enough endurance to stay ahead of them should you feel the need. The need for speed. Cringeworthy and out-of-date catchphrases aside, let's end this segment with a little factual data that might actually be of use to you. Assuming you are attempting to tame a level 120 Pelagornis, this is what you can expect. If you used kibble, and the appropriate kibble for a Pelagornis is Compi egg kibble, it would take about an hour and 24 minutes. If you're using raw prime fish meat, it would take just under 3 hours. Cooked prime fish meat, well, about 6 hours. And just straight raw fish meat, 8 hours and 45 minutes. Now, those are standard rates on an official server. Your mileage, of course, may vary. Now it's time for a few fun facts from our own prehistory regarding the mighty Pelagornis. When talking about wingspan, Pelagornis is quite possibly the largest bird ever to fly the skies of our planet, rivaled only by the mighty Argentavis. With an estimated wingspan of over 24 feet, and yes, there are small planes today of equivalent size, the Pelagornis was pushing the size boundaries of what is theoretically possible for a bird to attain. It could comfortably fit a modern albatross under one wing, and a condor under the other, with room to spare. There were flying reptiles that were considerably larger. The Quetzal is an excellent example of one. But that's because, comparatively speaking, a wing covered in insulated feathers is heavier than a wing covered only by skin. In terms of body weight, the Argentavis was a considerably heavier bird, as well as more powerfully built overall, weighing as much as perhaps 200 pounds compared to the Pelagornis that likely weighed in closer to the 50 or 75 pound mark. But with the long, thin wings of the more lightly built Pelagornis, well, it made for an unparalleled glider. This was ideal for a seabird that would spend most of its time hunting fish out over open water. Its unique body shape, with its immense wings and relatively small body and short, stubby legs, meant that it would have some difficulty getting itself into the air. On land, it would likely have needed to take a nosedive off a handy sea cliff or run directly into a stiff sea breeze to attain flight. On water, I imagine it used a technique similar to the one Goose's namesakes do, swimming and flapping frantically, going into the wind until it gained enough lift to be literally running across the surface with its wide, webbed feet until it could finally lift off. All in all, the Pelagornis was in reality a very impressive animal, and it must have been an awe-inspiring sight to see these aerial giants casting huge shadows on the waves as they glided along at an estimated 60 kilometers per hour. I'll never look at a seagull or a pelican quite the same way ever again. You might wonder why such a magnificent creature didn't survive into modern times. But you need to remember that in the early Miocene period, the Earth was a much warmer place. The ice caps were largely melted, and vast stretches of what is now dry land was at the time covered by warm, shallow seas. The perfect environment in which this titan of the skies could survive and thrive. Keep in mind also that it's estimated that 99% of all animal species that have existed on this planet are no longer with us. When you consider all this, it isn't hard to understand why such a specialized creature fell by the wayside as the climate became cooler and its feeding ground shrunk, its preferred nesting areas ending up far from the sea. Well, that's all I've got. I hope you enjoyed this look at the Pelagornis, and perhaps will consider taming one for yourself. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please remember to give me a thumbs up. And until I see you guys again, good hunting. Thanks for watching. I hope you were entertained. If you liked the video, please remember to subscribe. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you. And I'll see you next time.